a continuación a Timothy Fiore, share del ISM del PMI manufacturero. Timothy, thank you so much, as always, for having just a few minutes.
Yes, good afternoon, Marta. Thanks for having me.
Well, we've known the new data, economic activity in the manufacturing sector contracted this month, January, for the third consecutive month, is the lowest since May 2020. That's relevant. What is this new report, Timothy, telling us about the economic activity evolution in the US?
Thanks. So we're still trying to burn off that extended supply chain inventory reflected by very significant order streams and overfull order books, as well as inventory that's sitting at customers and inventory, manufacturing inventory that's flowing into our panelist companies. So the demand is still elusive. It's hard to find. This is the lowest new order number that we've had in some time. But I look at demand from the standpoint of new orders, new export orders, customer inventory, and backlog. The other three, new export orders almost expanded for the first time in many months. The customer inventory number came down slightly. It's at the low end of just right, which is positive. And the backlog number didn't contract as strongly as it did in December. So there's some signs. Overall, the sentiment from the panelists is about 25% of our headline comments were indicating softening order rates. That's down from 32% in the month of December. So maybe there's something there. So we're looking for the demand. The lead times are still too long, and I think that's causing buyers concern. They're not willing to commit to these long lead times. And you can see on the prices side that we did contract at a 40+% number. Not as good if you're looking for price reductions as December, but contraction nonetheless. Over 85% of our panelists are reporting that they're paying the same or less prices. So we're still looking for the demand. I think probably the biggest story of the month here is the fact that our hire to fire ratio, which I've spoken with your listeners and watchers before, for the last 4 months has been in the 2-to-1 range. So what that means is with every 3 panelist comments that I'm getting around employment, 2 of them were hiring and 1 was not. So 35% essentially was saying that they were trying to freeze their headcount or attrit down to lower levels or lay off. In the month of January, that actually changed to 4-to-1. So only 20% of them now are looking to reduce their headcounts, which is a very significant change because, the Federal Reserve is looking, I think everybody kind of agrees that they're looking for significant layoffs because when those people get laid off, they don't spend money. It shows weakening demand. It shows a better balance in the labor market. So it looks now like, at least for Q1, maybe for half one, that companies have decided that they're going to try to make it through the first half without crimping their profits too bad and keep those people that they work so hard to get rather than lay them off and try to rehire them in the second half of the year. So that kind of seems to be the big story, I think, in the month of January, is that the sentiment from the panelists is let's hold on to these people. Let's not let them go, even though short-term demand here is pretty weak.
And Timothy, of the 6 biggest manufacturing industries, one, it's transportation equipment, registered growth this last month, January. Which factors drove this growth?
So our transportation equipment sector is airplanes, it's automobiles, it's trucks, primarily the 3 of those. And I was pleased to see that we're in an expansion territory, not strong expansion, but expanding nonetheless. Last month we were contracting, but it was the first time that transportation equipment had actually gone into a contraction cycle. So I think I mentioned this to your watchers last month. What I'm tracking now is a percent of industry sectors that are in contraction, and more importantly, the percent that are contracting at a 45 or less, which would indicate some significant issues going on in those industry sectors. So we're still 85% of manufacturing industries are contracting. That means their own PMIs are under 50. But we had a change in the number of those contracting at 45 or less. So in the month of January, 26% of manufacturing was contracting at 45 or less. That's down from 35% in December. So that's a real positive thing, I think. That's a 25% reduction in the manufacturing sector is declining at 45 or less. So I'm hoping it stays that way. Obviously, transportation is not contracting, so there's only 15% of industry sectors that are not contracting. Transportation is one of those. It's about 10%, 9 or 10% of our industry sectors. But that's definitely a positive, and I'm hoping that trend continues. if we can keep, and since you're on the industry sector point, the chemical products area I'm watching very closely. That was the first significant industry, the top 6, to begin contraction back in the July timeframe of last year. It's been the lowest of the top 6, and in the month of January, it actually slowed its contraction. Think in the month of December 40, 41, in the month of January 45. So that's a positive because chemical products feeds pretty much all the other 17 industry sectors. Everybody needs some amount of chemical somewhere, whether it be fabrics, whether it be cement, whether it be steel making, they need chemicals. So chemicals and plastics, and that's what that industry sector is. It's the number 2 industry sector. It's about 15.5% of manufacturing GDP. So I'm watching that. So its rate of decline has slowed. And I'm hoping in the month of February, and especially in March, that we see chemicals start to expand again.
Should we expect more contraction next month?
So for the last 4 or 5 months, I've been predicting that we're going to be in a 48 to 52 range. This month, the month of January, we fell below that 48. We was 47.4. So disappointed. I'm disappointed. But again, it's not a real strong contraction month to month. There's a lot of weird things that happen in December and January. I think I mentioned this last month around December and what was happening in December and the holiday periods and the fact that people kind of quit a little bit early to get ready for 2023. The first half of January is normally a slow period. Our seasonal adjustment factors, especially on production, step the number up a bit. In the case of new orders, though, it doesn't step the number up as much in January as it did in December. So I'm still feeling 48 to 52. I don't see why it wouldn't be, especially if we're not going to lay off, if the majority of the industries are not going to lay off. Demand has got to come back. And I think companies are feeling that half 2 is going to be significantly better than half 1. And that was our prediction when we did the forecast, and we had a special show, I think, with you on the forecast. We said half 1 would be difficult, half 2 would be significantly better. And by the time we got to the end of 2023, it would look a lot like 2022. So I think we're executing to that plan. I think the big difference this time is that rather than lay people off and then rehire them in the May-June timeframe, which is typically what companies do, they're not going to do that. And I think that's because they've been successful at passing price increases on. They're going to have some absorption issues because output is going to be lower than they would like. So they're going to have to absorb more cost per unit, which will squeeze their margins a little bit, but not to the point where they have to lay people off and then fight hard to hire them back. I think the JOLTS report came out this morning indicating 11 million jobs still out there. So it all kind of fits together that they've all worked so hard to hire these people, they're not going to let them go. And as long as they can do that, I mean, I don't see the PMI number, falling much below that 48. If all of a sudden employment went down to 40, obviously it's going to drag the PMI number down, but I don't see it happening.
So if I understood well, we will see a range next month of 48, 52, isn't it?
I think we're there. I mean, I think we're still 48 to 52. I don't see, I see definite upside on the inventory number. That 50 and some change was pretty weak. I mean, that's especially with the extended supply chains and all the promises of take or pay that we did over the last couple of years. To have a manufacturing inventory number hovering around 50 is pretty low. I think the supply delivery number is going to get stiff again. Some of the weather issues here in the U.S. will probably help that number. I'd like to see that number get above 50 again, 52, 54. That would definitely help the PMI number. I think production is going to be fairly stable. I don't think we're going to see a significant decline. Obviously, the employment number is probably going to be about 50, for the next 3 or 4 months, maybe 49. I don't see a major fall off, and I don't see it growing dramatically. So, the big unknown here is really demand reflected by new orders. And, like I said, export, I'm not sure I mentioned this, but on the demand side, the new order number, although it's low, 42.5, that's a concerning number. The new export order number almost hit 50 for the first time in 4 or 5 months. That's positive. And that's a direct result of what's happening in China reopening, which should be actually better in February and even better in March. There's still concern in Europe. Europe is sluggish, according to the panelists. They're reporting not a lot of activity going on in Europe. So I'm hoping Europe will start to shrug off a little bit and start to increase its demand. You're in the middle of all that, and I think the performance at the end of last year for Europe was surprisingly positive. So, and then we have a customer inventory number here that is not growing, which is good. It's at the low end of just right. I'd like to see it get to too low again. And then we have a backlog number that, although it's contracting, it wasn't contracting as strongly as it was in December. So there's three positive indicators there on the demand side. The biggest one, the one that goes into the PMI number, the new order number, was definitely disappointing. But I think we're sitting at a 48 to 52. I don't see why not. I don't, outside of some massive energy problem or some serious escalation in the the Russian conflict with Ukraine, I don't see the Federal Reserve doing much more than trying to down. I don't see them jump. I think we'll see today moderate approach. So yeah, 48 to 52, Marta. That's what it feels like.
Well, TIMOTHY FIORE, as always, chair of ISM, a pleasure.
Thanks very much for having me. See you next month.